Hey, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for your support for the Deepening Place podcast. About 1.5 years ago, I started observing. And what I mean by that is I started my social media accounts, Instagram, and I started paying attention to what people were saying, conservative, liberal. And one thing that I've noticed lately is a lot of the conservative accounts that I follow are actually going away. And my guest today is Leah Love. And I hear a lot about amplifying Black voices, but I don't hear a lot of conservative Black voices being amplified. So Leah Love is a conservative activist, and I wanted to have her on so that she could tell her story and also tell a little bit about the censorship and the racism that she's encountered because of her beliefs. And one word I wanted to mention before we start the program is integrity. And the second definition I saw of integrity is the state of being whole and undivided. And when I say meet in the middle for a love revolution, one of the rules of the middle is everybody gets to be who they want to be. And if I'm not willing to allow somebody to be who they want to be based on their beliefs, I'm a hypocrite. So all this talk about love and equality doesn't mean a whole lot if it doesn't extend toward everyone. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Leah Love. Hello and welcome to the Deepening Place. I'm so excited today to have Leah Love here. Hi, Leah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm just so excited to meet you because I really admire strong women who aren't afraid of using their voice. I see that in you, and I appreciate you joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm definitely appreciative of you asking me. I'm quite honored. I'm always, excited to reach new people that may not, hear about my message. And truly right now, it's the time for we the people. So again, thank you so much.
Yeah. Could you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I am a homemaker, a wife, a mother of 4. My oldest is 26 and my youngest is 8.
Wow.
I also have a grandchild who is 5 now. And I have been homeschooling for over 10 years. And, recently I just had, during this whole COVID situation, I actually got red pilled. I am a Black American woman. And I was just so upset about, what was going on with the COVID instances that I began really reaching out. I started learning, and it has just been a revolutionary time for me. I've always been outspoken, so I've just taken to the airwaves, taken to Instagram, and have just really been trying to hammer into Black Americans who I feel need a different message, that, now is the time to really reinvestigate our history and the way in which this country has gone. And it's kind of been somewhat explosive for me in terms of just the number of followers and people really engaged with this. And I've been so excited to be able to, create bridges with Latino Americans, white Americans, Chinese Americans. And it's just been a wonderful time to finally feel like I'm a part of America.
That brought up about 1,000 questions because I met you on Instagram, like I meet a lot of people. And I would describe you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would describe you as like a conservative activist. Do you feel that that's
absolutely correct? Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And I have it on my Instagram page. So right now, and to be honest, it's just somewhat bizarre because I used to be a radical leftist. I used to be a Black Power,
Yeah,
whatever, coming out of college.
Tripped me up a little bit. You mean that this has just kind of been born in COVID time? This is
really, absolutely. Literally, I've not had a television in my home for like the past 18 years. I cut off cable years ago. If I watch anything, it's online, Netflix or whatever. But I've never been a fan of mainstream media. I've never been a fan of politics. I've actually never voted. because I just thought it was all a bunch of crap, and I just didn't want to deal with it. And so, to be honest, this is the first year I've registered to vote, and I have just been blown away by how misled I was. By just hearsay, family members, since I wasn't watching the news, just what I've been growing up with as an African American in America. And that's what I'm preaching about. So many are so misled, and it's a huge, deep brainwashing. And I fear for the children.
This is one of the moments I love. I told you before we got started here, I don't really like to talk to the people I interview a lot before because I like for it to feel really fresh. Well, this is like the ultimate fresh because I'm so shocked that this is a new thing for you. I thought you were just like a well-established conservative homeschool person. And to know that this is more of a recent thing for you is really a surprise. One thing I wanted to ask you about, you used the term red-pilled. I'm not sure if that is something that a lot of people understand. Do you mean just like in the Matrix movie?
In a way, yes. But what it means is that people who have been formerly Democrat or left or radical left or independent that have finally, done their own research and stopped listening to mainstream media, and they have realized how deep the lies go. And so they have been doing so much research that they ended up becoming conservative, or at least independent conservative, whether they're in the middle or all the way to the right. They've woken up.
And I hear some other Black conservatives use the term free thinker. Is that kind of the same thing?
Yes. I mean, that's part of the thing. And I read something yesterday that really just hit home with me. In fact, it was a video where the Black people who are waking up to conservatism, a lot of times you go through a phase of complete anger and outrage and rage because you realize how many years you've lost believing a lie. And it's very different. Unfortunately, we like to say we're a melting pot in America, but truly and honestly, a lot of, and I don't like to say that the Black community is a monolith because they totally are not, but there is a certain undercurrent which most, I won't say all, but most Black people adhere to, which is this narrative, this running narrative, even in 2020, that Black people are oppressed, that all white people have some form of racism in them, and that they are going to be perpetual victims. And that is passed down. And there's a whole body of science called epigenetics, where it's passed down from generation to generations. And they think sometimes in the DNA, this fear, as if we're in 1880 or 1818, and we're still in slave times where slave catchers, i.e. white cops today, are chasing us down in the streets. And there is this rabid fear that is built into a lot of Black Americans, and they simply cannot get out of it. And so that's part of my message, that, it's that is the red pilling process, when you realize that everything that you thought you knew was a lie. Okay.
And it's kind of like that thing that in order for people to stay in power, they need victims.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That segues really nicely into the reason that I reached out to you probably a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, was I read something on your page and it says, "Do you want to save your children?
Yes.
Stop emotionally and mentally traumatizing your children with your inherited fear and bedtime stories of generational victimization."
Yes.
And that just punched me in the gut. For one thing, I am the mother of 3 boys and I'm a therapist, and the continually telling them to be afraid would be, I think, the worst thing that I could do. And I know a lot of people would argue, well, you're a white lady, you don't have to worry about that. But I try to think about my daughters and how, you and I have this in common. We're both women. We both have learned that you have to be careful out there because there are men who will prey on you. And I would never dream of putting that fear into my daughter continually day after day. I'm just going to tell her to be careful. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, because that is something that if a client walks into my office and they're a victim, no matter their gender, race, whatever, I know as a therapist, if I can't get them past that, there's not a whole lot of hope for them to thrive if they choose to stay in that victim mentality. So it is astounding to me that we're doing this to a generation, especially of Black men, and it's going to keep them in a place where they can't thrive. And that concerns me. And that's why I reached out to you in the first place. And I wonder if you can speak to that from your perspective.
Absolutely. And again, I'm so happy you reached out. There are two different tracks. One, as you mentioned, for Black men, but then there's another one for Black women. And I think I felt the most rage within myself. I guess maybe 3 or 4 months ago, there was a viral video of this young Black girl. She must have been maybe 4 years old. And she was in a protest, a Black Lives Matter protest. And she had her fist raised, her fist in the air. You could see by her body language, she was walking briskly down the street with a bunch of people around her. And she was just fist raised, yelling, "No justice, no peace." And with every fiber of her body, she was deeply in this traumatized state that I have to protect myself and my quote unquote race because we are being killed in the street. And she's marching and she's marching. Now, first, it was my complete, I was traumatized while I was watching her. Imagine what that does to a young 4 and 5-year-old. And yet, what angered me even more is that the Black community, quote unquote, some of them were passing this footage along on every platform as, look at this young queen, this young warrior, this, oh, she knows what she's doing. And, even liberals, white
Yeah.
liberals of every persuasion were passing this along as, how wonderful is this? And I mean to tell you, I began telling this story, why it's personal to me, when I was maybe 7 or 8 and we were living in Baltimore. And this was a, mid to upper middle class neighborhood. And one day I went out to play in the morning and I saw this cross burned in my yard. And it was traumatizing to me because even though my family never talked about, my mom never talked about KKK per se, somehow or other, I got the message that KKK was out there and that, people didn't like Black people, even though it was mainly in a Black city. But I was so traumatized and fearful, and I was looking around because I'd go out to play every day and ride my big wheel and my bicycle, and my neighbors seemed nice. But to think that someone would take the time to do that, to frighten me and my family, was very concerning. So fast forward, that was the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward now to 2020. And I'm looking at all of the advances that Black people have made. And yet there is continued story or bedtime story time and constant conversations within the homes of Black individuals that is saying to young Black children, 2, 3, however old they are, to be able to understand this message that says, you don't belong in America. White people hate you. White cops are going to kill you if you step outside your door. My own stepdaughter here in this upper middle class area in South Carolina never had any altercations with police, never had an instance of racism in her life, but she was saying shortly after George Floyd that she's afraid to walk down the streets in this posh area, which she's never had contact with police. And she's telling, myself and her dad that she was afraid to walk out in the streets. So I'm just, you don't understand from a psychological point of view. And once I entered into college, entered into the socialist programming, I was a Black studies minor. I was an English major. So I took a lot of women's studies courses and Black studies courses. And now I realize they were all communists, all socialists, and they were all planting into my mind about racism and how terrible the white man and the Caucasian white male is and how terrible white people are and how oppressed we are. And that was in 94 when I graduated. But I can't say enough what happened to me once I came out of that program. My opportunities were limited all of a sudden. I was afraid to try for certain jobs. I was always going into job interviews thinking, oh, these white people are not going to, hire me because I'm Black, which was never the case. Yeah. But I was afraid, the fear, and it gets in your bones. It limits your horizons, your mindset. It keeps you in this state of fight or flight. It harms you so psychologically to think that because of your skin color in 2020, despite the fact that we have huge numbers of interracial marriages. Black men are married to so many white women. We've got a huge population of biracial children. And what it does to Black males is that it keeps them perpetually in an infantile state, that they cannot go out and be masculine, healthy masculine men to provide for their families, because they always say the quote unquote man is keeping
Yeah.
them down.
They can't really embrace that king with a vision because
No,
they always feel like they are being suppressed by someone else.
absolutely. And unfortunately, it's very interesting the way it ties together. And I wanted to share this with you specifically. For the men, that's what I shared in terms of them remaining infantile and remaining feeling as if they're powerless. But what happens to the women? So young Black girls grow up thinking that not only is white society against them, not only are they perpetually racist, but they also are drilled into the family culture that Black girls have to protect Black men, because Black men are so powerless that they have to. And Black men and Black leaders have constantly telling Black women, well, back in the 70s and 80s, you guys were getting hired more than Black men because they feared Black men. So you guys were the ones getting hired in jobs and we were left jobless, as if to guilt Black women into this state that we always have to take care of Black men and coddle Black men. And so we have this saying in the Black community that Black women raise their girls but coddle their boys. They're constantly saying we need to protect our Black boys from the cops. We need to protect our Black boys from these vicious white people out here. So what happens is Black women are now, as so-called heads of households, they have, limited their horizons. In other words, they don't even think about, dating viable partners, who actually has a job, who's not a victim. Their whole horizons is that even marriage is impossible because the Black man is so down pressed that, he's not even able to support a family.
Yeah.
So I better step in his place. They coddle Black men, they support and protect, which is why there are so many Black women on the front lines of BLM. And should anybody say anything about a Black man, they get so triggered because they have Black sons.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I know you don't know this about me, but I do a lot of work with mature masculinity.
Okay.
And what you're actually describing is like an emasculation. Like you're keeping them in the immature masculine state. In ancient societies or up until modern times, you had to go through those initiation rites.
Correct.
And cut yourself off from your mother and join the men and be an elder and go that way. This is almost what you're describing as like a reverse of that.
That's right.
So that's a very interesting point. I can't really explain this, but my whole life, I can trace it back to elementary school. I've had this deep burden for Black men. And it has gone on and on and on to the point I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this. And that's part of the reason I'm studying, masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
But the minute I came across some of these conservative Black male Instagram accounts, it evaporated.
Yes.
I'm like, they're fine.
Yes.
Because they have owned their own life. They've taken their life and they are becoming kings with a vision. And it's not so much about their belief or their conservative beliefs. It's about the belief in themselves that they can and should and will do it. So
absolutely.
I have seen that with my own eyes. So
absolutely. And that's one of the things that was so refreshing for me, because having come from the radical left side, I was always hearing Black males talk about, the man or the white man or racism and white supremacy and always these excuses. And when I started watching, Candace Owens and, Anthony or Brandon Tatum, and I'm seeing Black men actually not blaming Black women for all their problems. They always talk about in the 70s with the welfare program that Black women kicked Black men out of the home in order to get their welfare benefits. And within those circles, Black men are constantly beating Black women over the head about how in the past we kicked them out of the home. We wouldn't allow them to be be men, and then the white people wouldn't hire them, so they were just left out on the streets. And it's just this whole emotional and psychological manipulation that happens within the Black community.
Yeah.
And it's much like cultism and brainwashing. But when I saw these free thinking Black men who were taking personal responsibility for their lives and who were free thinkers and not constantly, talking about what Black women did to them. And I've always said in some of my posts, it's always comparable to the pimp and the prostitute. And I know that's harsh to hear, but at the end of the day, there is a whole movement of Black women. It's called the divestment movement. And you may not have heard about it.
I've not heard of that.
It's been coming on for about 10 or 11 years, but these are Black women who have finally awakened, and they realize the emotional and psychological damage that they've been put under by Black people and Black men in general. In other words, it's not to disparage them, but because they are committed to their victimhood, then they have to find somebody to be under them to feel like a man.
Yeah.
So that's where you get the pimp and the prostitute personality. Yeah. So now they're saying, you guys pushed us out of the house with welfare. You guys are the ones that are only getting hired back in the 80s. You guys have done this to us. And now we are going to put you under us and manipulate you and constantly guilt and blame you for our demise, rather than like Brandon Tatum and all of these conservative Black men who have taken personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. And are speaking out about it. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, there are numbers up to 60 and 70% of young Black girls are sexually molested by the time they're 18.
Yeah.
If the Black community is so quote unquote insular, there's not a whole bunch of white people coming in and out of their house. Who's molesting them? But they don't speak out about that because they have been guilted into, never putting the Black man on blast and never speaking out against the Black community, because that would be being a traitor. So yeah, but it's a huge movement. There's a ton of Black women have just left it and said they moved out of the hood. They've moved out of Black areas. They don't even want to talk to Black men. And so that's a bit of an extreme.
That's how it often happens. The pendulum swings. And so sometimes we overshoot and skip over the middle. That's really interesting. And I think it's important. And I know that you didn't mean this, but I think it is important to talk about what's also true. And for anybody who's listening, who this makes you a little bit uncomfortable, Leah's not saying that there are not racist behaviors. They're not things that are bad that we need to address, but it's also true. And I think that's where we've lost sight. We can only be on one side or the other. And I know that you've probably seen this too. There are a lot of conservatives that go so far over that way that they're refusing to see that there has been a lot of pain. There has been a lot of things that are unfair that we need to address. That's why I always like to say, let's come to the table, let's meet in the middle, and let's lay it down, and let's see each other's heart. And I think that's where the real solutions are going to take place. To your point, these women, they saw the truth, and then they've swung so far over that they can't really be in that middle place where solutions could happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because yes, I'm definitely not denying that we've had, a very difficult past in America. I'm not denying that, I have even experienced, racism. I'm not denying that. But what's really important, and I did want to make sure I shared this with you, I am hoping to bridge that gap with particularly Black Americans, though. And, fortunately and unfortunately, I guess, most of my followers are white Americans, white centrists, white liberals, and white conservatives, but who just, the number of DMs and inboxes with, individual Asian, white, Mexican that said, my Black friends hate me now. They all say that just because I'm conservative leaning, I don't know how to reach out to them. They won't talk to me. They call me racist. And it's really heartbreaking. But, one of the things that during my learning, I was reading and listening to videos by Thomas Sowell, the great Black economist. He's in his 90s now. But he said one thing which I want to share with Black people, and also white liberals, to be honest. He talks about the middleman in society. So he's saying, yes, there was global slavery since, the beginning of man. The Arab slave trade was huge. Even white people were slaves white people were sold into Arab countries. And this was hundreds of years before the transatlantic slavery happened towards the US. But he also talks about other cultures. And my message is, yes, bad things have happened, but look at the Asians that come into America. They generally don't mix in with other cultures. They settle down and they start business. They start working their way up to owning their own shops. They are very huge in educating their children. They promote education. They promote economic success. They don't worry about political success like the Jesse Jacksons and all of these people. And I think the thing that we need to understand, yes, the history was bad, but if Black people would stop being against education and saying, oh, you're just trying to be white. So many of us Black people who were intellectuals were told in our Black neighborhoods and in our Black schools, oh, you're just trying to be white because you're speaking proper English or because you're trying to learn and not get in trouble in class and you want to go to college. And it's still to this day in 2020, they're telling Black people, like these Black conservative males that you talked about, oh, you're just trying to be white. And we need to get to a point where, yes, the history was bad, but we have so much work to do. So get your family together, get the fathers back in the home, worry about education, educate yourself, worry about getting yourself economically stable, start businesses. Stop worrying about racism and what the Democrats are going to give you. How about you be a fully functioning human being like these people that got off the boats from Vietnam, all of these, they usually move into Black neighborhoods. Watch them within 10 years. They've got a corner store.
I think that is at least a yes and or a yes but moment. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I do think there is something to being brought here against your will versus being brought or coming here because you are striving for a better life.
Correct.
And also, you know, throughout history, starting with the emancipation forward, there have been some really difficult legislation and unfair practices like gentrification of an area, or like in Austin, for example, telling people if you want electricity, you have to be located on this side of the interstate. And when it comes to being a victim, it's also true that you're very powerful. If we could go back and allow people to heal what they need to heal, because some people have been very mistreated and other people haven't. And just because you're Black doesn't mean that you necessarily are a victim. I talked about this with my co-host Jai last season. Is it okay for somebody to just not want to identify as Black, that just wants to be an American?
Absolutely.
I think everybody should be who they want to be. And we don't really allow that. The left is not really allowing that. And I thought this might segue into something you could speak personally about, is this idea of racism. And I know because I've been watching you, you're experiencing a lot of really ugly things, name calling because of your beliefs. And I don't know how that's not racism too. And I didn't know if you wanted to speak for a minute about that.
Well, absolutely. And because I was brought up in the Black theology, so to speak, of racism, you know, there's something in the Black community where they say that racism can only be from white people because you have to be in power in order to inflict harm on other people. Then that's racism, which is different than discrimination, but part and parcel. That is a running thread in the Black community. So they all believe that they cannot be racist because they're not in power. They cannot affect people's jobs or possibility of jobs, etc. But I am learning that the internal form of racism, the psychological form of racism, can be definitely coming from any individual. And now it's more so coming towards their own Black people. So now, simply because you are a free thinker, an independent thinker, your own Black people hate you, literally. I've got family members that have shunned me. I've got friends that won't talk to me anymore. And it's very, very real. So yes, they are, and they can be even more harsher than, you know, white individuals who may be racist.
Like actual messages you're receiving and the names you're being called.
Yes,
and,
I'm being called coon. And, you know, one person said I needed to be beat up. That was a young Black girl, a young white guy, probably not even 18. I saw his pictures. He's probably in high school. He's saying, you know, how dare you as a Black woman in America not acknowledge your Black people's experiences. And I hope if you have a man in your life that he's whooping you every day. These are the type of comments that I'm getting simply because I'm being a free speaker. And really quickly, I just want to address something. I love what you said in terms of our history and not coming here voluntarily as opposed to those who do. What really turned me around was reading Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery and another book called Black Titan about A.G. Gaston, who was the first Black millionaire in Alabama. These were men who were born in the late 1800s to the early 1900s during, massive Jim Crow. And yet they managed to do so much for their Black community. And it speaks to how there are differences in people, even within the Black community, those who, despite what's going on, they are going to be successful because they understand the basics of faith, morality, and doing the right thing. And then there's also those in the Black communities who will be haters, like the messages that I receive, and who will simply like to say, oh, Jim Crow, or I'm a victim. But there are so many cases of Black men and women who strove to the highest heights. Madam C.J. Walker, like even through the worst times than they are today, and they managed to succeed.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I mean, my personal 100% all-time number one hero is Frederick Douglass.
Yes.
And I think if everybody read that book, My Life as an American Slave, it's like you wouldn't have any excuses. I mean, he literally took himself from being a slave all the way to being the greatest orator, marrying a white woman, returning to the bedside of his dying former master and telling him, I forgive you. And you didn't steal Christianity from me because you were such a terrible example of it.
There's a point where you have to move on. And it's been said, even in conservative and liberal circles, even if reparations were made, even if they were having white people kneel down in the streets a couple of months ago to say they're sorry to Black people. They are not going to get over this. Even if you pay them all $1 million, they're still going to be talking about what white people did to them. That's where I'm coming from, that no matter what you do, no matter how many apologies, they are invested in that psychological massaging of themselves. So there's this big chasm that we're just not going to be able to cross, because there's Black people that say there was Frederick Douglass, there was Booker T. Washington, there was all these people even in the worst of times, and 2020 is not the worst of times. So stop, just move on. Particularly stop traumatizing the children and ruining their entire lives. Something I posted yesterday where they talked about Black people are raised to think that they are not Americans. They are raised to hate the flag. They are raised to think that whites and everybody else do not want them in this country. And I know this well. So imagine what that does to a child who thinks they're living in a country that does not want them here and that they do not belong and do not consider themselves American citizens. It's that real.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Van Jones, and I think he was interviewing Rick Santorum, who's I think he ran for president last cycle. But Van Jones was talking about the fear and the trauma for his son.
Yes.
And Rick Santorum looked at him and said, look, I mean, your son has a much higher percentage of being killed by someone in your neighborhood than he does by a cop.
Absolutely.
And Van Jones said, well, not in my neighborhood. I live in a really nice neighborhood. And Rick Santorum's face just went like, I don't even know how to argue with this at this point, right? Stop traumatizing him.
Yes, that just summed it up right there. That's what our Black pundits and our Black so-called quote unquote leaders and Black activists, so-called journalists, that is what they keep pushing. And so it's no wonder that not only Black, but the vast majority of white, Mexican, every other Asian liberal believes that narrative. They keep pushing it. And for what? There's something deeper here that we have to understand. What is going on that in 2020, LeBron James, millionaires, Oprah, telling us that we are victims and slaves? Are you serious? Yeah. It is a deeper, sinister reality that's going on, that because the Democratic Party needs Black people to stay victimized and to feel that they're victims, they will keep going to them as a monolith to save them, even though they've not saved them in the past 60 years. So there's a reason why they're doing this, but you are ruining generations of children who could prosper.
You're playing with people's lives.
It's not just the mind, it is the life, because as we know, as you think, as you are. And so if you don't feel free, if you don't feel like you can flex your wings and fly and soar and go after what you want in your dreams, imagine what happens to your life.
Yeah, exactly. You don't really have a chance.
No, you don't. And then on top of it, to be honest, Angela, it's also unfortunate that we know the statistics with Black males. So not only are you traumatizing them and telling them that the cops are out to kill them, you're now telling them to resist arrest.
Oh my God. Yes. Stop that.
Now you're increasing the chances. So
Yes.
now they're telling Black men to resist arrest. And then now you've got the BLM and the Antifa after them to say, hey, even though he took the police officer's taser and gun, he was supposed to be able to run away after committing a crime.
That is so tragic, because we get to a neurological truth that nobody's allowed to talk about. When you come up to a situation where you're nervous anyway, your base brain is already activated. You're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode.
That's right.
You encounter resistance, then it's going to ratchet up a little bit and more. I mean, these are people, and they're in fear for their life, and they have a gun.
That's right.
And I tell my kids, if you're ever stopped, it's yes, sir. It's hands on the wheel. It's be humble, humble yourself. We talk about all of that. And if you try to say that to a Black person, it's considered racist.
That's right.
You know, if you can't tell them to protect themselves in the same way you're telling your children to protect themselves, there's something wrong with that.
That's right. It's like leading the sheep to the slaughter, like literally.
Yeah, if you resist arrest and grab someone's weapon, you're probably going to get shot.
And in so many of these cases in 2020 and 2019, the majority of them, not all, the individual was in the process or had committed a crime, and then they resisted arrest. Yeah. People don't want to hear it, and they especially hate when Black people say it. I watched a 40-minute long video of George Floyd resisting arrest.
Yeah.
40 minutes. Am I saying that Chauvin was right to do that thing? Absolutely not. And they never want to hear us when we say that. They immediately say, oh, so he should have been killed then? That's not what we're saying. If he had, from the first 5 minutes, the men were so kind and nice. They kept talking to him. They thinking he's got a mental issue or something. We're not going to hurt you. We can sit there with you. Please just cooperate. We're not going to hurt you. 40 minutes of this. And so if the man had cooperated, he would be alive today. Yeah. That Chauvin didn't come in until like the last, 10 minutes of it. 30 minutes before, he had been resisting arrest.
There are examples of Black men being killed unjustifiably, but there are also examples of white men being killed unjustifiably that we will never, ever see.
Actually, more. The numbers are that there are more white men killed unjustifiably by cops than Black men.
Recently, there was the story of the guy who was dancing with his girlfriend in the house. They knocked on his door in the middle of the night, put him on his knees and shot him. And, it happens. It does. And it's awful. Police brutality is a thing. I don't think it's as common and widespread as we make it out to be. And I don't think we serve people by making it a bigger thing than it is and telling them to resist arrest when they do encounter the police. So
absolutely.
I can agree with you on those. I wanted to give you just a couple of minutes to address this one thing, because it is the one thing that's happening right now that is truly terrifying to me, and that is censorship. And I know that you are encountering that, and I wanted to give you a chance just to say a few minutes, because any listeners that I have that are liberal, left, that aren't following any conservative accounts, they have no idea that this is happening.
Oh my gosh. So yes, it is happening. I guess maybe from the hashtags, you have people who follow conservative accounts just to tag their other friends and start reporting posts. And so eventually what has happened, and I'll just talk about my own personal experience, not even the beginning of last Monday, not this Monday, but the one before, my message was going viral enough to where I was getting 125 to 150 follows each day.
Wow.
And within 4 months, my account went from 2,000 to almost 7,000 followers. I was getting a reach of, if you go into the stats, I would reach about 90,000 to 100,000 people for a lot of my posts. I would have several thousand likes on my posts. People were sharing my posts in the 400s and 500s to their friends in their DMs, literally as of Monday. And several conservatives have said the same thing as of Monday, that my reach has now gone to maybe 2,000 Before it was, on a post the week before, if it was 80 to 90% of my likes were from people who weren't even following me, which means I was on the trending page. So it's gone from 80 to 90% of people who weren't even following me that were engaging in my posts. Now it's 1 to 2% of people who are not following me have seen my posts. Now I've gone down to maybe a couple of hundred likes. I've been literally battling. I think I'm at 68.55, and literally since Monday, it's gone down to 52. It's gone up to 57, back down to 52. I can't even break, to the 60.
Yeah. Have you actually been threatened to have your account suspended?
Yes, I have had my account threatened to be suspended because somebody was angry about a post that I made. I tried to go live the other day, and they gave me a message that said, in order to protect the community, that I am not able to go live on my account until November 4th.
Your voice is not allowed to be heard live because it's
Absolutely
such a danger.
And so I was so pleased this morning, though. So I know that the left never hears this because they have full range of freedom of speech on platforms, and Twitter and Facebook are actively censoring freedom of speech. And so now Ted Cruz has announced that they are calling the head of Twitter and the head of Facebook to the Judiciary Committee next Friday to answer for this, because even the press secretary, her account has been blocked and banned. This is no longer, a democracy. We have big tech everybody is talking about their accounts are being completely taken down. People are creating double and triple accounts, backup accounts, because it's that bad. And so I've been recommending people go over to Parler, which is a free speech, a social media platform. It's not just for conservatives.
What is the name of it?
It's called Parler, P as in Paul, ARLER. Okay. And it's growing. It's it takes a learning curve, but it's total free speech. There is no banning, and people are going. So I'm hoping that Twitter and Facebook, whatever your beliefs are, to go along with this plot and this plan to no longer allow free speech, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, that's
really scary. And the fact that Twitter is blocking the New York Post big splash about the Biden, Ukraine, and China collusion.
That New York Post story kind of brought it to a head and got the attention of maybe Ted Cruz or whatever.
Absolutely.
But to your point, one of the rules of the middle, meet me in the middle, is I have to want for you what I want for myself.
That's right.
And if I want my free speech to be protected, I have to want yours to be protected, even if I don't agree with it.
That's right.
And that's the American way. And that's what we've always fought for in the past. And that's why I'm saying this is particularly terrifying to me. This is not American. The ends do not justify the means. And one day you're going to be on the other side of it. And you're going to wish someone had spoken up for you or yours.
That's right. And I'm so glad you said that, because unfortunately people are having to point to Venezuela and what happened. They supported this whole movement, that what's happening in America now. And then they realized after they put these other people in power, they turned on their very supporters. Yeah. And now the country's ruined. The left is not understanding that they are not going to be protected from this totalitarian regime-type behavior that's going on right now.
Yeah, you're not. Then there's going to be nobody left to speak for you either.
Exactly.
And it kind of it ties back into what you were saying about Black men. What big tech is actually saying is you're too weak to handle the truth.
That's right.
You can't handle the truth, so let us protect you. These are dangerous people. And just for the audience, I mean, Leah, I know that you're not some radical person that's out there talking about doing dangerous things or inciting
Absolutely
violence.
Not. Mm-hmm.
Basically, what you're talking about here on the podcast is kind of what you're putting out there on your Instagram. So it's just different ideas. It's not dangerous ideas. And that's what we really need to come back to, that we can have different ideas. So
absolutely. And to be honest, and what I love about our conversation here, even if I may be more towards the right than middle, but some things I am on the middle. One of the things that really pleased me, and I've heard from countless Black people who've recently been red-pilled, they have said that on the conservative side, doesn't matter whether super far right or not, they've been able to debate and have a conversation. But no longer can they do that with their leftist friends and family members. They literally get irate, they walk off, they defriend them. There is no conversation, unfortunately. And I've been so welcomed amongst the conservatives. All of the liberals that I know have been trying to tell me that every single conservative is a white racist. I can't tell you how much friendship and people telling their stories and
Yeah.
curiosity
Yeah,
that I've
being
gotten.
curious about you, wanting to know what is your story.
Yes. And I've not seen any racism coming from the conservative. I've not even had racist or conservative trolls on my page saying, oh, you black woman, whatever, KKK, what, all of that. I've not had any of that, but it's always coming from the left. So you've got to understand, for those of your listeners who may be more left leaning, my in-laws are liberal. My husband is biracial, but he was adopted very early on by a white family. And so he's always lived with, in a very white community, very liberal white community. And he's in fact very liberal. And I know at some point he thought I was going crazy. To have white in-laws who are very radical or liberal. It's just an interesting dichotomy. I don't discuss this with them.
Yeah.
And they assume that I'm still liberal, and I'm not. But I just want liberals to understand something is happening in this past couple of years, that to not be able to have a conversation and just hypersensitive and can't discuss anything. You've got to look at that and say, where is the middle ground? What happened that you became so enraged and hateful towards Trump without actually looking at his policies, without researching anything, and hating any and all, including Black Trump supporters? I've had more racism from white liberals than anything else. What is that?
Yeah, I see that. I mean, just even here in Austin, seeing a Black state trooper being attacked by white BLM people, I'm thinking we are in the Twilight Zone. We have entered the Twilight Zone.
Absolutely. And shout out to Austin. I graduated from UT Austin. So
really, that's
really
amazing.
miss that town. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, open invitation anytime you want to visit. I would love it.
Absolutely. I think it's been since 2000. I left in 2000, but I love that city.
Well, thank you so, so much for joining me today and sharing your heart. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Angela, for having me. And to your audience, I welcome you. If you want to contact me on social media or whatever, just to have a conversation and not curse me out or tell me how I'm a Black sellout, like so many white people have been doing lately. But you want to have an actual conversation, I'm always open to conversation and my real experience.
Yeah, that's really important work. Can you tell people how they can reach you on Parler, Instagram?
Fortunately, on all of my platforms, except for my Patreon, I am Leah, Leah, Love, Love, online. So it's Leah Love online. And that's the same on YouTube. That's the same on Instagram, and it's the same on Parler. My Patreon is the bus transfer, like a bus. You remember the old days you used to get a transfer ticket? And so there's a reason why I called it that, but I do have a Patreon where I go more in depth, especially I've got 3 levels, but the middle level is for, remember I mentioned divestment, and for Black people who are just recently opening their minds to other information. But it's open to all, everybody can join. And so that's the bus transfer on Patreon. And again, I really want to thank you, and I want to bless your podcast. I hope it continues to grow, that you just have positive vibes and people really embracing your message, because your message is super important, Angela. And I really want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I received that blessing and thank you for it. Hopefully we'll talk again often. I have really enjoyed meeting you. Thanks for being here.